Hello, good morning. Welcome back to day 2 of our Forces for the Future conference. I hope all of you had an amazingly successful, enjoyable, reflective day yesterday of both fellowship but also of learning. And this conference has 2 parts, as you can tell quite subtly. The first part is to provide a unique opportunity for all of you to be part of a training exercise to help you become more proficient and informed around your stewardship of the Senior Community Service Employment Program. But we are more than CSEP. We're also an organization and a network that's invested in a broader workforce development space, of which CSEP is a part, but has, from my reckoning, too often functioned on the margins. So this conference is our attempt to begin that transition from the margins into the center. And with that, we identified a wonderful partner in the Institute of Work and the Economy to help bring some of their tools, some of their content, and some of their wonderful speakers onto the program. So today, we make the pivot. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Peter Kredikos, who's the president and CEO of the Institute of Work and the Economy. Before I introduce Peter, before he gets up on the stage, let me walk through his bio. Peter Kredikos is the president and executive director of the Institute of Work and the Economy. He's also a research fellow at the Chaddick Institute for Metropolitan Development at DePaul University in Chicago. He's also an adjunct faculty at the Institute of Technology, Stewart School of Business, and in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at Roosevelt University. He's taught at the University of Illinois of Chicago and Governor's State University. Prior to establishing the Institute in 2000, Mr. Kredikos served as the vice president for the Midwest Regional Office in Chicago of the National Alliance of Business Commerce and as president for the for-profit subsidiary Center for Business Development for the Chicago State University president, and as he also served as an independent consultant and researcher on economic and workforce development issues and as field director at the Council for State Governments. Mr. Kredikos earned his PhD at the Graduate School at Northwestern University. He also did his work on skills-based closeness of fit strategy in job matching at the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management Science at the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. I won't say any more. As you can tell, he comes with a rich background of scholarship, of leadership in the workforce space, and it's my pleasure this morning to turn the program over to Peter Kredikos.
Just realized my cues are down there, so I'm going to shut this off. Welcome. Thank you very much, Gary, for your wonderful introduction. And I see you have my high school graduation picture here, too. So I appreciate that. First of all, I do want to recognize, before we get into a formal introduction for Peter Georgosescu, Nick Laplius, who is, stand up, please. Who's the Region 4 Administrator for Employment and Training Administration here in Dallas. So Nick is going to be around for a little bit this morning. If you have some important questions to ask, he's here to answer them. Yeah, he'll try, and so long as he's allowed to do so. But that's just an editorial opinion on my part, not his. So I have a great honor this morning, and that's to introduce Peter Georgosescu. I met Peter actually for the first time when he came to our conference in Chicago on the Many Futures of Work, and he was introduced to me by a dear mutual friend of ours, Lamia Kamal Chaoui, who would not mean anything to you, but she works for the international organization called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development based in Paris. And I asked Lamia who was, in her mind, the premier thinker and doer in dealing with issues of corporate shareholder strategies, shareholder primacy issues, and the change in which corporate governance has moved. And her first person that came to mind was Peter, and it was we've been eternally grateful to Lamia, but for introducing us to Peter, but also, frankly, very grateful for the friendship he has shown our Institute for Work in the Economy. So Peter Andrew Georgosescu is Chairman Emeritus of Young and Rubicon, and was born on the eve of the Second World War in Bucharest, Romania. He actually looks younger than me, but he's a tad bit older. His Romanian parents were educated in England and France, and Peter's father was the managing director of Exxon's operation in Romania. But while on a business trip in 1947, the Iron Curtain fell, and Peter's parents could not return to Romania. Overnight, they became the enemy of the communist regime, and his father would have been killed if he had returned to his country. Peter and his brother were then left in Romania with his grandparents and would remain apart from his parents for 8 years. His grandfather was seized and imprisoned as a political threat and then murdered in captivity. Shortly after his grandfather was taken away, Peter, who was only 10 years old at the time, was arrested along with his brother and grandmother and sent to a work camp. In 1953, his father was approached by the Romanian communist diplomats in New York and asked to spy for them in exchange for keeping his children alive. His parents refused and went to the press, which caused an international scandal. And then it was with the intervention of Congressman Francis Bolton and President Eisenhower that the boys were reunited with their parents in April of 1954. Peter's American journey started with a gifted admission to Exeter Academy in the fall of '54, which generally overlooked his inability to speak English and having no formal schooling since second grade. He then went on to graduate from Princeton University, cum laude, and earned an MBA degree from Stanford Business School. In 1963, he entered Young and Rubicon as a trainee in the research department, and 37 years later, he retired as chairman and CEO of Young and Rubicon, with YNR at the pinnacle of the advertising and related communications industry. Under Peter's leadership, Young and Rubicon at that time, an integrated marketing and communications firm which was comprised of YR Advertising, Burst & Marsteller PR, Wonderman Direct Marketing, Landor Design, Cohn and Wolf PR, was successfully transformed from a private to a publicly held company. And then during his tenure at YNR, built the most extensive database on global branding, and from its findings, developed a proprietary model for diagnosing and managing brands. Within the marketing community, he is known as a leading proponent of creating unified communications programs, agency accountability for measuring the impact of communication programs, and structuring value-based agency compensation. That's a point that I'm sure Peter's going to return to actually in this presentation. In recognition for his contributions to the marketing and advertising industry, Peter was inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame and received several honorary doctorate of humanity degrees and other recognitions from a number of colleges and universities. Peter has served on 8 public company boards and continues as the vice chairman of New York Presbyterian Hospital, Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowships for New Americans, and several other non-for-profit organizations. He's authored 3 books: Capitalists Arise, which is available for everybody in this room outside, Sources of Success, and The Constant Choice. So please welcome Peter Georgosescu.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, save it for later. Let's see how it goes. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. And thank you very much, Peter, for that very warm introduction. And Gary, it was a pleasure to meet you, and wish you continued success with this very important conference. Now, yes, I'm an immigrant, obviously, from the story, but I'm also standing here this morning in front of you as a capitalist. And I am also a committed capitalist who's determined to convince his fellow brethren in business that we must face with wisdom and urgency what I consider to be the single most important existential challenge for America, which is income inequality, which leads to inequality of opportunity. Now, you may think about, why am I talking about business here? And as a student of business, I can tell you that I am familiar with the relationship between business and society, the way it is and the way it ought to be. And let me give you a couple of reasons why business is important here. In our country, business is the only institution which can produce prosperity and growth. The only institution. Now, government can help, can support, can enhance, can foster, can even incent business to produce that prosperity and growth. But at the end of the day, only business can create it. So business matters. A second reason is that it's an issue of clout. Business contributes some $19 trillion to the economy every year. Government, by contrast, about $4.5 trillion, and most of that money is already committed to pay our deficits, getting bigger every day, to also pay for the military, for healthcare, for education, and so forth. So most of that money is committed. And yet most folks look to the government and say, government should fix the inequality problem. As far as I'm concerned, business must accept and adopt inequality as our own most important and urgent issue, both in the short term and the long term. So to that end, I'm working hard to convince business people and CEOs particularly that we must change the way we do commerce in this country, the way we behave in business in this country, both for our own self-interest and also for the benefit of our nation. Now, if we go back in time to the 2016 election season, and there we saw Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump give voice to the have much to less in our country. These are the folks who have been frustrated, disappointed, became angry, people who have lost hope that any one institution in this country was willing to pay attention to their plight and then do something about it. And yet here we are, about 1 year and 3/4 into a new Congress and administration, and actually nothing, in fact, happened to address the plight of this group of have much to less in America. But the one certain thing is that inequality in this country, this chasm, is getting wider and wider every single day. So my presentation today will try to do a few things. Number one, importantly, try to quantify and also a little bit define what inequality really is. What are we talking about when we're talking about inequality? How big is the problem? And then look at, from a business perspective, has business been culpable in helping create this chasm between the haves and the have-much to less? And finally, what can we do about it? How can we lay the tracks for the future, which is going to be a long slug, to really begin to address the problem of inequality of opportunity, which is the real problem here? So, as far as I'm concerned, lots of reasons for us capitalists to arise and then act. So one of the key missions for us, important one, critical one, is to preserve free enterprise capitalism. Now, why do we want to do that? And I will assert that free enterprise capitalism has been proven to be the most powerful generator of prosperity and growth that mankind ever created. Now, that's a mouthful, strong statement. And let me give you a couple of reasons why that is this case. It is free enterprise capitalism which has made America the #1 military and economic force in the world today. We're the world leader because of free enterprise capitalism. And between the years 1945, just right after the war, the Second World War, and about 1980s, free enterprise capitalism has built the largest economic market in the world, which was America's middle class. And then we saw that the principle of free enterprise capitalism have lifted amazingly hundreds of millions of people. Yes, I mean hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty into a much more humane standard of living. Just think about the 400 or 500 million people in China who came from the agrarian world of near starvation to really, not unlike us, a middle class in China today. And India, much the same. Parts of Asia, throughout Latin America, obviously in Europe, and now even in parts of Africa. So this is a powerful machine that really has accomplished an extraordinary amount. And if you look at the world in general, the level of poverty has really diminished dramatically, all because of free enterprise capitalism. That said, today, this beautiful machine is at risk. And it's at risk because for the last couple of decades, this wonderful machine that I talked about was unable to fix our most challenging problem, which is inequality. In fact, during this period of time, inequality got worse and worse and worse. So what happened to this beautiful machine that I talked about? And that's going to be part of my presentation. Because it's important for us to understand, and if there's a way for us to alter, change, improve, whatever, we better do it. Because remember, only business can produce prosperity and growth in this country. Like it or not, that's just the reality. So, before I go to trying to define the solutions, let me try to define the nature of the problem. How big is inequality? And so I went to work. And that's how the book, Capitalists Arise, was born. Out of concern and worry that we better face this extraordinary challenge. And when I first started to work, I realized that it was hard to define what inequality was then and what is today. I heard numbers like if you make below $30,000 a year, you really are basically in poverty. Or even at the median of $54,000 a year, that is a serious problem. Or if you make even $70,000 or more a year, you have 3 or 4 kids in school, you're struggling, man. You're struggling to make ends meet. So I said to myself, those numbers are okay, fine, but I needed a more human definition of inequality. So I thought that I should look in America's homes and see what we can find from that, a more really emotional, human way to look at it. And I had the idea, crazy idea, about looking at the kitty. You know what I mean by the kitty. Every home has it, or metaphorically we have it. You have all the money that comes in and all the money goes out, and there's something left in the kitty. So I was going to look for the kitty. So I asked a very smart young economist friend of mine to tell me, I said, is there data around that can get us to that? He said, oh, absolutely. All you got to do is to learn how to navigate the Bureau of Labor Statistics information, and it's all there. Not analyzed the way you like it, but, and I said, put my arms around, and I said, okay, pal, you do it. And he did. So what we did is take 126 million homes in America and divided them in 10 equal parts, this analysis, taking all, on the one side of the ledger, all the income, meaning salaries and bonuses and stocks and whatnot, and at the lower end of the scale, either food stamps and unemployment insurance and transfer benefits, in other words, from help from government, federal, local, state, whatever. All the income one side, the other side take away taxes and all the household expenses. And then came the analysis. And I got to confess, it shocked me. Maybe it'll shock you, maybe not, but it was a stunner to me. It was a stunner because what I discovered is that close to 60% of American homes had to borrow money most months at the end of that month to put food on the table. I thought that was a shocker to me. Close to 60% of American homes are basically insolvent. And then very quickly I could see that charts, as you'd see in green, that 20% of us, my goodness, life is as good as it gets. Pretty fantastic. And then I thought to myself, well, look, those upper middle class folks, meaning those squeezed between the 60% that are insolvent homes and the 20% that are doing great, must be really pumping up the economy. That would be your upper middle class arithmetically. And what we found is that at the end of the year, not a month, at the end of the year, the kitty for those folks were $8,500, the disposable income. And God forbid your car gets into some kind of problems, or your roof leaks and you're not fully insured, or God forbid you get sick or laid off, and then you are in serious trouble. And that's exactly what Joe Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist, said. He said, 4 out of 5 Americans will experience some form of poverty in their lifetime today. And Janet Yellen, remember, former Fed chairperson, she said, a $400 unplanned expense, and most Americans can't cope with it. 4 out of 5, that's 80%. Here's your 80% that my data shows. So this is the reality of the situation. We have 2 Americas here. The 25% of America that's doing really great, and the rest of the country, which is the vast majority of America. 2 Americas going on here. Now, to be a little bit open about the reality of this problem is not just America. This is the developed world problem. And I won't explain most of the chart, except here's what it shows. It shows that America is the most unequal of the developed nations, and our society is the most immobile. What I mean about immobile society is the ability of a person to move from the last quartile to the top quartile in 1 generation. So we have the dubious honors of being the leader in inequality of income and inequality of opportunity or mobility in this nation. So this is a serious problem. So what are sort of the socioeconomic consequences of this inequality that we've been talking about? And you know what's interesting, with a few exceptions, particularly in some of your areas in rural America, this is not explained by geography. It's not north, south, east, west. By and large, this is a zip code problem. Because within about 3 miles of anybody's home, particularly the haves, there's another zip code right next door that most of the have guys never go into. Their lifestyle is opaque, and that's a problem because most of us in the 20% live in a bubble. But the problem in the zip codes is real, and it's serious. And it starts with education, actually. And education is pretty terrible. And it's terrible because public school education, as you know, is paid by real estate taxes. If you don't get paid a lot of money, you don't have money to buy big houses, and therefore a lot of taxes to take care of the education. So the physical schools are dilapidated, most of them, in terrible disrepair. And the classes are crowded, and the teachers are underpaid because there's not enough money and no resources for after-school programs and so forth and so on. And so the dropout rates are huge. The preparation for college almost inexistent. The few kids who go to colleges are underprepared to hang in there, both academically and socially. And some of them have to come home and help take care of the family, to pitch in. And then we know today that by the age of 3, most kids need to have, not most kids, all kids need to have some developmental work, formal developmental work in cognitive skills. It has to start around the age of 3. And in the 20% of America, that's known because all those kids go to preschool. And they got tutors and got summer camps and all the rest of it, but those things don't exist in the other zip codes. Not even kindergartens, because in most states they don't exist, or they are charter schools that are too expensive for these kids to take advantage of. So education is a huge problem that's been going on for about 4 decades. And you know, part of the problem that is in these zip codes is the fact that the head of the household is a single parent. The majority of those single parents are a single mom. She often has a couple of jobs to put food on the table. And I was trying to imagine, and eventually I talked to a lot of these folks when I was working at Young Rubicam. We did a lot of research, ethnographic work, going to people's homes. And I was originally wondering what was it like at dinner time, the conversation that parents had with the kids. You know, they were talking about, how did it go today? How is the bully in the schoolyard? Can you manage him? What was happening? Or the teacher was on your case for a couple of weeks now. And how about the way you handle your peers? And so forth, and other things, the importance of working hard. And issues about morality and ethics, the teaching moments that happen all the time with kids, because they need to learn. And you need to support them and encourage them. How are those conversations going? Well, what about citizenship? We're not squatters in this country. We are citizens. And we ought to have responsibility, and we ought to be held accountable as citizens. How's the conversation going? And of course, it doesn't, because such conversations don't exist. The mom's often not there because she's got to work. And the kids have Facebook, and they have the gangs and pals, and access to drugs and alcohols, and lots of ways to get into serious trouble. And unemployment, particularly for kids who haven't finished high school, is horrendous. So we got some serious problems here. And even among the folks, many of the folks who do have jobs, too many of them are frustrated and humiliated because they can't earn enough money to give their family a decent standard of living. Going back to what happened in 2016 election. Frustrated folks, disappointed folks. So we've managed to create millions and millions of young people, undereducated, not fully understanding the reality of what is, or caring about it, because nobody cares about them, so why should they care about the country? And that's not good news for democracy. And you know, there's a lot of loss of hope. You know what the American dream was all about? It was about being the best you can be. And I lived that dream. And I'm here this morning because I want that dream to be alive, not just for my 3 granddaughters, which I have, lucky me, but for all the kids, all the children in future generations, so they can be the best they can be. But there's lots of hope lots of loss of hope today. And the opiate epidemic, which goes across all strata of demographics, is horrendous. At the upper end is, boy, what a great way to get a high. And at the lower end, this is the ticket to the solution to desperation. And I took the top 1% of America and contrasted it with the bottom 1% of America in terms of longevity of life on Earth. And the difference between the top 1%, bottom 1% is 15 years. This is not America versus the Maasai tribes in Africa. This is our two Americas. So, what is it like to be in today? Well, for some, life is great. You know, the stock market, notwithstanding the recent correction, is at record levels. I mean, it's nosebleed levels. And Wall Street Journal just posted an article that said Wall Street salaries for the bankers and the financial community are now higher than they were pre-2008 crisis. And yet, the wages for most American employees have been flat for 4 decades. And even this year, in 2018, wage increases are below inflation rate. Just below inflation rate, but they're not quite catching up with the reality of the cost of living. And credit card debt is approaching almost at record high levels. And total debt for these households is at all-time high levels. And this is all in the other America because the other folks don't have debts. And they don't have educational debts either. But for the have much to less America, the credit card debt, the educational debt is now over $1.5 trillion. So we're also seeing interest rates now going up. Now these people have to borrow money. And by the way, the credit card is only one way to do it. Sometimes they have to borrow money in the community, you know, the black market, which is like 100% interest rate. And in addition to that, the month of October is going to be a shocker to many folk who will find their medical bills going up 20 or more %. And about 8 to 10 million Americans have lost their insurance, health insurance, and that's a problem. So we have also, the reality that we face is the American economy, which supposedly is at record levels and booming and wow, fantastic. We kept getting, this morning you should hear on television if you get up early enough like I did. I got all this, economy is terrific. And look at the numbers, look at the measurements. And I suggest to you that the measurements do not reflect the real America. What do I mean by that? Well, you all heard about GDP growth. Now, GDP growth, national product growth, is a function of all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the other America. The only thing that has to do with the other America is consumption spending increases. Now, if you don't have any money and borrow money to put food on the table, how are you going to increase your consumption? So the only thing that we're measuring here is the consumption among the 20% of America. So GDP growth numbers that are bandied around are irrelevant to this other America. And then you have the stock market. The blue line is stock market values. The red line is the net worth of the other America. And what you see is that the stock market has shot way past the 2008 levels, even before the crisis. The stock market is booming. Whereas the net worth of the majority of America is 10 percentage points below the 08. So we're way below 08 and equally below 2000. So we can't say the country's doing great because the stock market's up. Oh, and then you have the unemployment measure that is now at the lowest conceivable possible level at 3.7%. So the red line is a line of unemployed men. This is a chart for men, unemployed men who should be working from age 25 to 55. They should be working. And look at the red line. These are the folks who are not working. So here we have structural unemployment that's close to 15%. So the regular number that we all taught around being so terrific is, have you looked for a job in the last 6 months? So the point is that we're not measuring the right things. We're not talking about the right things. It's not that data doesn't exist. We just choose to pump up numbers that are irrelevant from reality. So what's this really, if you can kind of summarize what's happening here, is that we have a middle class that is really insolvent. We have an upper middle class that's barely hanging on. We have the creation of what I call an India-style caste system, where if you were unlucky enough to pick the wrong zip code or the wrong set of parents, you get stuck there. It's very hard to get out. Some people do. They work harder. They're really smart. And somebody looks after them, whatever, they get out, but not enough. And at the top, we have a plutocracy, us 20%ers and so. Life's as good as it gets, and we like to do everything we can to just keep it that way, because life is good for us. Well, the net result is here is the lack of opportunity. It's not just income inequality. Income inequality drives lack of opportunity. It's not the problem. We'll never be, look, we're all unequal. We'll always be unequal. Some of us are taller, shorter, faster, slower, whatever it is. But we need to have equal opportunity. That's what America, the heart of America, and American exceptionalism was all about that. Extraordinary opportunity for more and more, if not all of our people. In 1960s, Will and Ariel Durant, they were historians and novelists, and they said, we've seen inequality before. When it gets to be too big, history says it always gets resolved. And it gets resolved in two ways. Either you redistribute wealth. The famous French economist Piketty, about 4 years ago in his book Capitalism, said that. He said, oh, we'll put 80% tax on the rich and we'll redistribute wealth. The problem with that is even if you could do it, it doesn't last very long. You're back to get-go unless you do many other things, and you haven't solved the problem. The other thing is you can redistribute poverty. And the French, prime example number one, they did that. And the Chinese, they did that. And the Cubans, they did that. And the Venezuelans, they did that. It's pretty ugly, actually. And of course, I saw it personally under the communism, because my family and I were the victims of it. And that's why the children of so-called capitalists ended up cleaning sewers, which I did for about 4 years as a young man. So that doesn't work. So that's why I'm here standing in front of you today saying we've got to find a different problem, another way to solve the problem. And business can do a lot about it. Remember, business is the institution that produces prosperity and growth. So, lots of reasons that contribute to inequality. You know most of them, you've read about most of them. I want to spend most of my time on this thing that I call shareholder primacy, to focus on business, because I know that's the thing that we theoretically can control if we have the will to do it. And I want to go back to the first part of the presentation. And remember, I made that thing, let's preserve free market capitalism because it's so important. So I want to tell you just a little bit about why was it that between 1945 and 1980, things just happened so beautifully? What was it like? Well, here's what it was like. Corporate America and free enterprise capitalism understood that there are 5 critical stakeholders. First, you take care of the customer, because if you don't take care of the customer, nothing good ever happens to you. Secondly, you got to take care of the employees who deliver the goods and services. And then third, the shareholder who brings along the money, and then the corporation itself. Because let's remember, particularly in the 21st century, the corporation needs to be invented and reinvented and reimagined, because there always are people in the garage next door, in the basement, who are going to eat your lunch. Just look at what Amazon did to how many businesses. They weren't that much smarter. They just decided, hey, those guys are asleep. Let's innovate, let's create. And they did. And every business needs to worry about those kids in the garage. But it needs resources to do that, and imagination, and mostly people. And I'm going to come back to that, because that's us. Okay, then there's the communities and the nation. Look, business and corporations were created to make society prosper and thrive. And there was an implicit contract between society and business. Society gave business two huge advantages. Number one, always a lower tax rate than the individual tax rate. And I don't mean the 40% cut they got, that was ridiculous. But they always had a lower tax rate. And secondly, limited liability, which meant that the investor was never really tangled up in the individual problems of the corporation. You can walk away from those problems with no loss. Huge advantage. In return for that, the corporation was really asked to be a good citizen in the community and do things like the Chamber of Commerce in 1980 defined. They have to create jobs in the economy and to pay people fairly. And for those wonderful 60 plus years, this is what happened. It was a happy place, because free enterprise capitalism took care of all 5 stakeholders. Okay? And I want to give you an example. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you. It's in the book, or even cheaper to go and look on the internet. But this is Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceutical Company. 1963, I think it was, when this came out. And just the first line, it says, we believe that the first responsibility that we have is towards doctors and nurses and mothers and fathers. In other words, to the customer. Take care of the customer. Give them quality products at a reasonable, affordable price. Okay? And then the second paragraph was about the employees. It was about respect and dignity and recognizing merit. And we must have the people must have a sense of security in their jobs. And also a balance between their personal lives and their business lives. Hello? That was the agreement. That's how the corporation should behave. And then be good in the community, support good causes in the community. And I love this one. Pay our fair share of taxes. Not the lowest taxes. Let's pay our fair share of taxes as a corporation. And if we did that, the shareholder is going to do just fine. And that's how corporations work. The profit became a byproduct of doing a lot of things very well. And that's why I said free enterprise capitalism can be a powerful force of providing prosperity and growth to this country. Well, things changed. Business and government, starting in about 1980s, during the 1980s, and then written by the apostle Milton Friedman at Peter's favorite city of Chicago, came up with this notion that actually the purpose of business is to provide value to shareholders. And that morphed into today's version, which is to maximize short-term shareholder value. Two really bad words, maximize and short-term, for the shareholder. So forget stakeholders, forget 5, now it's going to be 1. So for 4 decades now, shareholder primacy has resulted in dramatically different outcomes than the previous set. Now, the whole value of sharing shifted to the shareholder. And I'm going to delve into it just so we understand what's going on. Total shareholder TSR, total shareholder return, now is a reflection of an equation. The financial community looks for earnings per share as the mega measurement of what success looks like on a quarterly basis. Ratio earnings per share. And if you can't drive the earnings the old-fashioned way, the traditional way, which was really driving revenues and getting a lot of profit from that, you can now reduce the number of shares. And the ratio is still fabulous. So go, man. So what do you do? Business is smart. If those are the rules, I'm going to figure out how to do it. So what do? You buy back your shares, so you reduce the denominator. Ratio looks terrific. What's it mean? Now, there's a study on the S&P, Standard & Poor's, 500 top corporations in America. And between the years 2006 and 2015, 54% of the net profit went to buy back stocks. That was $4 trillion. So think about what you could do with $4 trillion in terms of paying people, investing in your business, investing in basic research in the future competitiveness of American corporations. No, $4 trillion went back to buy back stocks. And that's a very tax-efficient way to give money to the shareholder, because the value increases and the stock price goes up, and 84% of the stock value, the stock market value, 84% is in the hands of 10% of Americans, the top 10% of Americans. So that's who benefits from that. Very tax efficient, benefits that shareholder. And the other way is to pay dividends, also very tax efficient way. Preferential treatment for dividends to shareholders. So 36% more goes to that. So you're now off 90 cents out of every operating dollar goes to the shareholder. No more stockholders, the other stockholders, the shareholders is promising. And then on top of that, about $1 trillion of cash gets put either on the balance sheet or sent overseas, so you don't pay taxes on it. So this is some of the consequences of shareholder primacy in America today. Profit margins, in a fairly depressed world that we have today, are at all-time high. Corporate profit margins. How do you do that? And here's a very ugly chart. The red line is increases in productivity in America. And they're terrific because workers do that and have done that consistently since the war started. And look how beautiful it was. Remember when I said free enterprise capitalism works? Look at the two lines up until 1980. It's one line. As productivity went up, wages went up. And then magically in 1980, horribly, what happens is wages now go flat. Because now people become a cost. They become fungible, easy to replace, a commodity-like. Almost breathing robots, if you want to push the analogy further. They don't matter. Which is kind of stupid because they represent still 50 to 70% of the cost, but they're being demeaned. They're not being rewarded, they're not being recognized for what they do. So that's a problem. And people know that because today, 2/3 of American employees are disconnected from their businesses. They say, I just need a paycheck. Do you think they get up in the middle of the night saying, my God, I'm going to go back tomorrow and really worry about how I'm going to increase productivity and innovate on behalf of the company? And 16% of employees are so upset that they work against the interest of the corporation. Bad news. On top of that, investment in research and development for the corporation goes down. If you look at a chart in terms of basic research, further down. Because we need to maximize short-term shareholder profits quarter by quarter. Now, the shareholders who want every penny they can possibly get pay the CEO a ton of money. Why? Because the CEO is responsible for delivering the quarter-by-quarter profits. And if they don't do it, they get fired. Simple as that. And it used to be that most CEOs would be around for 10 to 15, some even more than 20 years. No more. The average tenure of the CEO is now 4 years. The average tenure of the chief marketing officer who's supposed to deliver revenue growth that is not, you don't invest in, is under 2 years. That's the way the system works. Okay. And then there's a change in activists. Activists used to be people outside the business world who would look at the financial markets, would look at the corporations and say, some companies are asleep. We need to help them. So you work with the companies to develop better plans to fix their problems, and you press the boards to do something. You even get so upset that you buy all the shares and you keep them and fix the company because you believe in the company. And that was a very constructive, useful force in the marketplace. But more recently, within the last half a dozen years, you have a new breed of the new hedge fund activists who have a different thing in mind. They want to push shareholder primacy to the limit. And what's going on here is these guys come into a company, they take out all the cash that the company has on the balance sheet. They fire a whole bunch of people on the streets with the name of synergies. And then they flip the company and they either take it back public or they sell it to some strategic investor. And this is really bad for the business because they now blackmail CEOs and boards and say, either you do what I would do if I come in, or if you don't want to do that, I'm going to come in and do it for you. So this is another very powerful negative force on the economy and how we treat people and how we deal with business. That's the way it is, folks. Okay. What's the justification? There has to be something because we're not all asleep here. What's the narrative that suggests that this is okay? And the narrative is a simple one. The shareholder is the owner of a corporation, and as the owner, they deserve to get, and they should get, what they want when they want it. That's the narrative. Even makes sense for a while, doesn't it? But then you look at it and say, does the shareholder behave like an owner? You come into a stock when you want, you leave when you want, you're not liable to any of the problems that the company has. At most, you're a renter or a squatter, but you're not an owner. And there's one other little thing. There's no law on the books that says that the shareholder owns the corporation. No. The preponderance of legal opinion is clear. The corporation owns its own assets. So the other thing that they're the owners is a myth. It just isn't true. So we've created this brouhaha out of whole cloth. So that's the way it is. Not pretty. So where do we go from here? Well, if you define the problem reasonably well, the solutions begin to write themselves. Because again, we need to preserve this machine that used to work very well, that can work very well, but not this version of the machine. This version of the machine has got to stop. It's got to be changed. We must change the behavior. That's what I meant in the beginning. We must change the way we do business, and we must change the culture, which affects not only the companies, but all the companies that do business with our companies. They do the same things. So this is cascaded down in a negative way, and that's got to change. So the fiduciary responsibility of the CEO and the boards of directors has got to be to go back and worry about all the stakeholders, not only the customer, but also the people, the corporation itself, and the country. Okay? That's what has to happen. So what does it mean for employees? This is important. Why did free market is also called free market capitalism? Why? Because way back when, capitalist and money was critical, was the differentiator in the business world. If you had money, you would build factories, you build distribution system, you gave people like me advertising budgets, all the rest of those good things. So that's why it was important. In the 21st century, money is no longer a really rare commodity. Money is everywhere. Money is cheap. Just take a bundle of cash, go to the bank, and see how much you get for it from the bank. Hardly nothing. And yet, the shareholder who provides the money gets 92, 93 cents out of every profit dollar. Makes no sense. So today, who are the driver of success in the 21st century? We've got to compete with China. Let me tell you, they are worthy competitors. They're coming like crazy. And if we don't fix it, they're going to eat our lunch. Or mostly they're going to eat our children's lunch and our grandchildren's lunch. So we got to think about who are the value creators in tomorrow's world. And the answer is clear, obvious, and simple. It's the employees, the workers. Who else can produce productivity increases and who can innovate? Not the CEOs, not the C-suite. They do other things. It's the people who engage every day with the product, with the people, with the customers. That's the secret to success. That's what's got to happen. You've got to turn around now, if you're a smart business person, and understand that the real driver of success for you in the future are the employees, your people. So you have to change the culture from treating these people as breathing robots and treat them like the value creators, who they really are, who they have to be, because otherwise nobody is going to increase the value of the products and services that you have, except for your people. So you got to treat them with dignity, with respect. You got to pay them fairly. And what do I mean by paying people fairly? It's not a transfer of wealth. I'm not for that. Just give people a chance to contribute and let them share in the value of that which they create. That's what I meant by treating people fairly. Pay them in cash, pay them stock, I don't care. Whatever works for that business at a time, but share the benefits with the people. And also pat them on the back, for Christ's sake. Because you do want them to think that they're important and valuable, so they can wake up in the middle of the night worrying about how to improve the customers, how to make the customer happy tomorrow. Put a goddamn smile on your face, for Christ's sake. Because it matters. That's how you get the stickiness of the business with your customers. And you know, it works. We have lots of examples. I'm a director of another not-for-profit called Just Capital. Just Capital, by the way, started by another billionaire, Paul Tudor Jones. We went out and researched America, 50,000 people research, and found out, what do you guys think is a just company? And they said, pay people well, pay people fairly, give them good benefits, gender equality, let's worry about sustainability in the environment, and so quality products, everything that you think about. So we took the Russell 1000 companies, top 1,000 corporations, divided them in 32 industries, like the retailers and the, let's say, the energy folks and so forth, bankers and lawyers separately, 32 vertical industries. Took the most just of those 32 people, compared them with the rest of most of the other companies, and believe it or not, the shareholder got a 30% increase in the value of the shares, which says treat people fairly, pay them well, recognize them, pat them on the back, do the right thing for the community and so forth, and everybody wins. And that's the good news and the tragedy. We're sitting here supposedly maximizing shareholder profit. We're not. And we're hurting the people and we're hurting the country. And if you do that, things can work well. Here are some examples. Home Depot does it to a large degree. Costco, since the beginning, they took Walmart folks, tripled their salaries in the toughest business, which is basically, you know, discount retailing. with the lowest margins you can have. And since 1983, when Jim Sinegal started, they've been compounding at over 16% a year, nonstop. So it works. About 3 years ago, Delta Airlines, magic happened. They went back to profit sharing the value of the company. Today, they are the #1 airline in America because their people are delivering superior service. They're making more money, they're getting more customers, and by the way, they take off and land more on time than any other airline in America. So this works. And you take America's companies are #1 in technology. You know the suspects, which is Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Facebook. And how do they do that? How did they get there? They got there by paying their people a ton of money. They invest in their businesses colossal amount of money. They think long-term, not quarter by quarter. And they're the big kahunas in the universe. So we know this works, folks. So all we have to do is to develop the will to do it. And it's not easy because change is hard. And so, anyway, we need to act with urgency now. And I'm not going to go through the rest because by now you know what we have to do. We got to pay people fairly, take care of the corporation. Now, the one other thing we have to do is business with government, and this is worth mentioning. Business and government must improve education in this country. Long term, we cannot fix the inequality if we don't fix the education. And we need to worry about trade schools. We have 7 million plus jobs going unfilled today, many of them hugely high-paying jobs because we don't have the capability to do that. So trade schools are important. Training and retraining is very important. That business, we must get in the business of developing people and training people for a lifetime. And this is the next to last chart. This is a philosophical principle. Business and society must come together. Today, they operate in two different universes. You cannot have business thrive and society go to pieces, or vice versa. They must thrive together. And business growth is important, and the only reason it's really important is because business growth at the end must result in finding and increasingly great solutions for human problems. And that should be the role of business. And we can make it happen. And so if we act with urgency, and if we get the government to collaborate with us, instead of being paralyzed, do something out there constructively for the people. And if we believe that human values matter, that morality matters, that truth matters, that we measure the right thing and do the right things, that's important, then we also strengthen democracy in America, which is so important. And then we can reasonably say and conclude that the best days for America are ahead of us. And that's what I hope for us and for our children and for generations next. Thank you very much. So, Peter, that I cannot, he's paid me all these big bucks that I can't leave until I answer your questions. And so please don't hold back. I'll do my best. Your mic's in the back. Mics are in the back, so please, if you line up on a mic, and please don't hold back. Come on, guys. The mics are right there.
Can I just ask you for my table?
Sure.
Talk about increasing minimum wage.
Okay. The question was, let me tell you what I believe about minimum wage. Okay. So obviously, I think it's critically important to do that. Where I may differ with some of the general conventional wisdom is this. we can't, there's not one single number that makes sense to me. A living wage is a living wage, and we know how to figure it out. In what works in Peoria versus Dallas versus New York is different. So we should look at regions of the country and come up with a number where a family can really have a decent standard of living. And that should be what a living wage is. A minimum standard of living, we know CPI, it's not difficult to figure it out. Because if you have one single number, it's not going to work fairly. It's an average. In some high-cost markets, you're way below. In other markets, you're doing great. So we have to have a minimum wage. And that's my perspective on what the minimum wage should be. Sir, or ma'am.
I'm just wondering, how do you determine what is a fair wage when you have like CEOs making maybe, I don't know, $500,000 a year? You have your average workers making $40,000 to $70,000 a year, and then the company is making billions of dollars a year. How do you determine what's a fair wage?
Okay, again, as I mentioned, in terms of minimum wage, I just said, they have to have a decent standard of living wherever they happen to be, okay? Because you can't, in Bangladesh and in New York City or Dallas, you can't have the same numbers, right? That just won't work in general. So you have to have that. Now, the point I was trying to make is this in terms of how much do you pay people? You share, people have to share in the value of what they create, whatever that is. CEOs get paid too much money right now, but that's not the determining factor for the problem that we have today. It isn't. They get paid not $500,000, they get paid millions of dollars. The ratio of CEO to the average worker during that period of wonderful growth was 20 to 1. The CEO got 20 times what the average worker got. Today, it's like 400 to 1. So there's a gross unfairness here because, again, the system allows business to be disconnected from society. And so now we have to have a situation where the employees must share in the value they create. And it depends by business. You can't have a fixed number. It doesn't work that way. Depending on the business, you create value, you share in the value you create. For 40 years, they did not. Not a penny. They did not share a penny in the value of what they created. And that's what the change is. And depends on the business. Look, there are people at Home Depot that are today millionaires, and they started out by pushing carts in the parking lot. And they hung in there, and they rose through the ranks, and they grew responsibility. And those workers today are millionaires, and there are a whole bunch of them. So people can get a very decent amount of money and success. And that's what we need is we need people to create more and more success and then share in the benefits. And that's what's not happening today. Sir.
Identify yourself, would you?
Yes, my name is Bob Greenberg. I'm a job developer with the Urban League of Westchester County in New York. And my concern is for all the nonprofit organizations. I'll give a quick example. This is my wife has been a physical therapist doing home care for 45 years. She has not had a raise, nor her colleagues, in 12 years. Not 0.25%, 1%, zero. So in fact, hers and our cost of living has gone down. Our cost of living has gone up, but our living style has had to go down. What are the nonprofits and all things like her agency? And as a side note, I was in Janet Yellen's class in college, so we all studied the same thing.
Okay. All right. So here's the issue. The issue is one of culture. We can't just have business do their thing individually, separately. We must change the culture. And the culture will begin to take effect. We have to reimagine our value system. And I think your wife falls into this category. Let me take, for example, teachers. Teachers are grossly underpaid in this country. Grossly underpaid. We pay baseball players a fair amount of money for hitting a round ball with a round bat, but not teachers. You go to Finland, and here's what's happening in Finland. By the way, their scores are the #1 scores in the developed world, infinitely bigger than us. And what's happening in Finland? To get a teaching job, you cannot apply for a job of teacher if you didn't graduate in the top 10% of your college. You can apply. And you get very, very fine compensation for that. So again, this is a matter of culture. What becomes valuable in our society? And yes, nurses and therapists and teachers have to get a significant increase of what they deliver. But the culture, again, is that the top people get it and the rest don't. And that's what's got to change. And it's going to take time. But we got to work for it and demand it. And something else. We got to prove to business people and to leaders and not-for-profits and whatnot that there's a correlation between us able to work hard to improve productivity, to improve innovation, and the benefits that happen. If we can do that, then we have a right to really push hard to demand it, not for moral reasons. Look, we're not going to win on morality here. Let me tell you this. We ain't going to do that. We're going to win because we are the value creators in the future. Your wife is, the teachers are, all of you are, and that's how we're going to win. We got to demonstrate that we can add value to the people and to the business. Sir.
Hi, my name is James Perry. I'm CEO at the Winston-Salem Urban League. And I appreciate your this presentation. This is a conversation that we have almost weekly in my office. And the thing that I'm curious about, though, is so let's say that businesses do provide fairer wages and higher wages. Isn't there a fundamental challenge that technology makes it so that the American economy needs fewer workers, right? And so even if wages are higher, if there are fewer workers, we still have a fundamental poverty issue for folks who are not needed in the workforce, right?
Okay. So, forever there was always been gloom and doom that the next technology is going to put everything out of business before. Some may be true, and that again comes to education for both businesses and government. We must prepare and educate people for the talents and skills that are required for the next generation, for the next phase of human development, right? So I am not a gloom and doom person here, because what we have seen is, and here's the other thing, is so far all we've asked of technology to do is to fire people. Please replace my people with technology. Let's get more efficient so machines can do more and people can do less. Why not ask technology to say, hey, can we help people become more valuable? Do more. What's productivity? Productivity is value divided by the number of people. So what we do is now we increase productivity by reducing the number of people or the cost of people. So instead of doing that, let's increase the value of the people. Let's take the people who are there and increase their ability to create value, and then increasing productivity. And technology can be asked to do that. And it's happening in lots of businesses now, in healthcare, for example. When technology created a DNA, and we have now hundreds of thousands, probably millions of jobs in healthcare, that are really well-paying jobs. And we have even robots that make surgery so much more effective for humankind. So don't despair yet. Let's put technology to work to help people, not just to fire people. Ma'am.
Mary Wright from Jobs for the Future. You mentioned about union membership declining. What role do unions and union relationships play in this equation?
I had indeed the union issue on the slide, but I didn't want to go through all of that because I would have never gotten to the end. But here's the issue of the unions. And I'm now speaking as a capitalist. Unions are very important in the future, and they need to be important in the future. There's an end part of it, and unions must become partners to business leadership. I've been a director of 3 manufacturing companies, and unions acted in an insane way. I won't go through the case history, just accept my conclusion on that. And that it just doesn't work. Because unions started to demand things, and it wasn't even unions, union leadership often was the problem. They started to ask of business to say, I don't care what happens to the business, you can make money, not make money, I want more. That just doesn't work. So the first job of management and workers is to say, how can we make the pie bigger? And then let's battle over the shares of that pie. But you have to start collaborating. And I'm very excited about it. I was at Aspen Institute last summer giving a presentation, and I met the young union leaders of the future, and they get it. So I'm very excited because I think workers need a voice. They need somebody to negotiate for them. And again, you look at countries around where this collaboration works. Let's go to Germany, for example. Germany's got a better, stronger society and business than we do by far. They've got political problems now, so be it, that's different. But workers have a role to play in their supervisory boards. They have a voice in how the company gets managed and so forth. And we need that kind of collaboration between union and management. It's very important in the future. But both of them have to have united goals around the future of the success of the company and then the future success of all the people. Ma'am.
Cheryl Holman with Community Assistance Programs. And it sounds like you're asking us to do a call of action. And we should, because there is a huge gap between business and the workers. But how would you suggest that we start this conversation with business?
Well, I think, frankly, I think that business better start the conversation with workers. I think it's upon us. Look, we've got the cards here. Let's face it, we got the power. So it's incumbent upon us to understand that it's in our own self-interest to do this. We're not asking business, I'm not asking business to sacrifice here. Maybe I should, maybe I could, but that's not what's necessary here. It's just doing the right thing. So I think the burden should be on business to begin this conversation and discussion. From my perspective, what you have to do, all of you, again, from my selfish perspective, is to say, begin to prove to businesses that your contributions make a difference. And then battle for that. You can't just, trust me, you're not going to win by arguing this is not fair. You're just not going to win that. I'm sorry. Life isn't always fair. The reality is demonstrate that what you do matters and prove it to them. And then you have an argument to say, we, in fact, deserve and must get more. Last question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Mitch Wu from Chinese American Planning Council in New York City. You mentioned in your presentation a couple of times that you do not believe in transfer of wealth. Can you go into a little bit more detail about how that's problematic? For example, you mentioned Germany just a couple of moments ago, and there are German corporations that do pay forms of reparations to Jewish families because of the exploitation during the war. And would that be something that would be feasible, and would it work here?
Well, okay, now we're getting in the world of politics and so forth, and you know, obviously society needs to be held accountable for some of the sins of the past. Agreed with that. But the issue of wealth transfer is that I don't know what fairness means when you start to talk about wealth transfers. And it's also, you see, one of the things is, and I'm being practical right now, I could really start to attack the pay of the CEOs, which is immoral, okay? Fact. But that's not the problem. Because what we need to do is to get these CEOs to change and do the right thing. So I'm not going to first punch them in the nose, and then I'm going to say, okay, so let's do the right thing. We don't need to do that. So I'm saying you're not going to win the argument of wealth transfer. And you don't need to. Maybe if the situation were different, and that's what the French Revolution was about, at the end of the day, you get so frustrated because nothing's going to happen, you're going to take it away from them. And I'm telling you, that's not a pretty sight. I've lived through that. It doesn't work. And we don't have to do that here. There's enough here for everybody to win. And that's what I'm saying. I mean, before we get to the barricades, let's try to do the practical, real thing. Business can win and people can win. And we are the people, and I'm putting myself with us, we are the people, because I'm on your side right now. We can have to demonstrate and create an atmosphere where business wakes up and says, either we fix the problem or other people are going to fix the problem, because as those historians said, the problem is going to get fixed. And yes, maybe we'll get to the barricade someday. I hope not. So we better get on it. And that's why I say I think it's up to business to start a dialogue and start to recognize, and there's enough money here for both we, the value creators, to win and for the corporations to win. There's enough possibility for all of that to happen, and that's why we collectively should work together to make that reality possible. Because at the heart of it all, that's what the spirit of America was about. There was a sense of fairness. There was a sense of we are here because we believe in possibilities for everybody. We've demonstrated it can be done, and I'm convinced that that dream, the American dream, the inclusive prosperity, is within our reach to make happen. And it's up to you, up to me, up to all of us to make it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.